Hello everybody and welcome to St Andrew's Church, Soham. We are here because the marriage registers for this church from the year 1792 record that on the 7th of April 1792, this man, recorded in the registers by his baptismal name, Gustavus Vasa, married Susanna Cullen. Susanna Cullen is recorded as being a spinster from this parish. Gustavus Vasa is recorded as an African of the parish of St Martin in the Fields, Middlesex, a bachelor. The couple were married by licence. Both Gustavus Vasa and Susanna Cullen were nonconformists. Susanna Cullen's parents were benefactors of the Soham Methodist Chapel. You can still see their names on the foundation stones of that chapel. The Cambridge Chronicle, for the fortnight following the marriage, records that Gustavus Vasa was well known in most of this kingdom as a preacher. The thought is that he was a Methodist lay preacher, and the next thought is that the couple might have met when Vasa came to preach at the chapel. Perhaps that's when Susanna saw him. That is speculation. What we do know is that Susanna was a subscriber in the years 1790 and 1791, the 2 years preceding her marriage. She was a subscriber to the 3rd and 4th editions of this book, The Interesting Narrative, a book written by Gustavus Vasa, who was born Olaudah Equiano, born a member of the Igbo tribe in Nigeria. More on that and on this book as we go inside. Before we go any further, it is worth noting that these two portraits of Equiano, otherwise known as Gustavus Vasa, are noticeably different one from another. This portrait is certainly a portrait of Olaudah Equiano. This portrait was used in the frontispiece of the first volume of The Interesting Narrative, the autobiography which Vasa Equiano wrote. This portrait is in the British Library and it dates from 1789. The portrait, which is a colour portrait, which is often circulated and used in relation to Equiano, is this one. There is no evidence that this is a portrait of Equiano. It is attributed to Alan Ramsay. This is in a museum in Exeter, in Devon, and this portrait is simply called An African. It was painted very probably in 1760, which is a time when, in fact, Equiano was not in this country. So you make your own choice, but I prefer this one for the certainty surrounding it. The interesting narrative, regardless of the portrait that is now on the front of this Penguin volume, was published in 17 1789. In it, Equiano charts his early life, his capture, along with his sister, when he was 10 years old, his capture by slave traders. It records what happened to him as a slave up to the point where, in 1766, Equiano buys his own freedom. His master then is the Quaker Robert King, and Robert King has previously made a verbal promise to Equiano that Equiano could, if he was able to generate the funds, buy his freedom from his master Robert King for the same price that King purchased him for. Equiano does gather the necessary funds, the large sum of money in those days, although what sum can be paid for a human life. Equiano gathers together £40 and he presents this to Robert King in 1766, and so Equiano wins his freedom. He buys back his own life. Equiano writes of that and of his other many and varied experiences in this book. This book went through 17 editions from its publication in 1789 until Equiano's death in 1797. Equiano's wife, Susanna, predeceased him and is buried in this churchyard. Equiano had 2 daughters, Anna Maria and Joanna, both baptised in this church. His elder daughter, Anna Maria, died at just 4 years old, and she is commemorated on a memorial plaque on the outside wall of St Andrew's Church, Chesterton. This book was a key text, an influential text, used by the abolitionist movement of which Equiano was part. Granville Sharp used extracts of this text in his presentations to Parliament. Those presentations achieved changes in legislation in the 1780s, and ultimately, as part of a much greater effort, the abolition of the slave trade in England 10 years after Equiano's death in 1807. We don't have a statue here in Soham commemorating Equiano. Instead, we have this small plaque just behind me. The text of that plaque reads, "In memory of the writer and abolitionist Gustavus Vassa, Olaudah Equiano, the African, and his wife Susanna Cullen, who were married in this church on the 7th of April, 1792. Equiano's story is a complex story, and it raises complex questions. In his introduction to this volume, Professor Vincent Coretta, whom we had the privilege of meeting here in Soham last year when he came to participate in last year's Equiano celebrations, Vincent Coretta states that in buying his own freedom, in engaging in this practice, which in those days was called redemption, Equiano, Coretta states, implicitly acknowledges the legitimacy of the slave trade. You might like to ponder whether you agree with that question. Questions of collusion, whether implicit or explicit, whether by choice or whether we collude when we have no choice, are questions surely not just for back then, but for us as individuals and as the church today. In the interesting narrative, Equiano writes this chilling question: O ye nominal Christians, might not an African ask you, learn you this from your God, who says unto you, do unto all men as you would have done unto you? It's also interesting to me that when he signs letters, Equiano signs them in the name that was given to him as a slave, the baptismal name given to him, Gustavus Vasa, the name of a Swedish king. That name was surely given to him to point out the irony that whereas a king has power and earns the respect of the world, a slave has no power. The slave is awarded no earthly respect. And yet that is the name Equiano uses when signing letters. It's the name he uses, you can see in the appendix to this book, he uses as he signs many letters that appear here. We don't have a statue. I would like to think that in Soham every day, we and our collaborators in this place work and live to create living statues. We welcome to this church year by year hundreds of school children coming to learn about the life of Equiano, coming to be inspired by the truth that whoever you are, whatever your beginnings, whatever your life has been, you can achieve a position of influence. You can provoke change in this world. Equiano achieved that change not only by his own writings, but by his own collaboration with others who were prepared to listen to his experience, an experience that was very different from their own. Others who were prepared to listen to that experience, to learn from it, and to use it to, together with Equiano, achieve a more just society, a better world. That surely is our common task today. Do come to Soham and see this plaque, see this place for yourselves.